The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the frayed edges of her tunic and claws that scraped the skin of her hands raw. Alara hunched her shoulders, a useless defense against the wind that howled down from the frost-fang peaks. It was the wind of the unclaimed, the sound of loneliness itself. Her task was simple, demeaning, and endless. She chipped ice from the frozen trough with a rusted iron mallet, the shock of each impact jarring her bones. The pack's beasts would need water, and she, the pack's omega, was less than the beasts. She was the one to provide it. They called her Alara the Ash-Stained, Alara the Shadow. She had no family name, no one to claim her. Her parents had been exiles, cast out for a crime no one ever spoke of, and they had perished in the unforgiving wilds years ago. The alpha of the Blackwood pack had taken her in, not out of kindness, but for the utility of a creature with no will of its own. Her fingers were numb, clumsy things that barely held the mallet. She could see her breath plume in the frigid air, a ghost of the life still flickering inside her. Sometimes she wondered why it bothered, why it didn't just give up and let the cold win. A sharp, mocking laugh cut through the wind. Look at it, scrabbling like a rat in the snow. Alara didn't need to look up. She knew that voice. Lyra, the Alpha's daughter. Her voice was like honey laced with ground glass. Alara kept her eyes on the ice, her knuckles white around the mallet's handle. "Did you hear me, filth?" Lyra's boots crunched in the snow, stopping beside her. A beautifully tooled leather boot kicked the wooden bucket Alara had spent the last hour filling. Icy water splashed over Alara's legs, instantly soaking through the thin fabric of her trousers and freezing against her skin. The pain was a sharp, biting thing. A gasp escaped her lips before she could swallow it. "Clumsy," Lyra sneered. "Now you'll have to do it all over again. And be quick about it. My father has an important guest arriving today. The entire pack hall needs to be cleaned, and you smell of ice and misery." The important guest. Whispers had been slithering through the pack for weeks. The Alpha King was coming. A being of myth and terror, a ruler so ancient and powerful that his name was only ever spoken in hushed, fearful tones. Kaelin. Why would a king visit a remote, unremarkable pack like Blackwood? What could he possibly want here? Alara gritted her teeth against the searing cold on her legs. She didn't respond. Silence was her only shield. To speak was to invite more scorn, more pain. Lyra hated silence. She grabbed a handful of Alara's matted dark hair and yanked her head back. Alara's neck arched, her spine screaming in protest. The gray sky filled her vision. "When I speak to you, you answer," Lyra hissed, her face close. Her scent was of winter roses and cruelty. "The Alpha King will be here by nightfall. You are to remain out of sight. The last thing we need is your worthless face offending a true Alpha." She shoved Alara's head forward. Her forehead hit the frozen rim of the trough. A starburst of pain exploded behind her eyes, followed by the slow, hot trickle of blood. Lyra laughed again, a sound devoid of all warmth, and walked away. Alara stayed there for a long moment, kneeling in the snow, the icy water cementing her trousers to her skin. She touched her forehead, and her numb fingers came away stained red. The blood was shockingly warm against the cold. It was proof that she was still alive, even if she didn't feel like it. With a shuddering breath that felt like swallowing razors, she pushed herself up. Her legs screamed, her head throbbed, but she picked up the bucket, set it upright, and raised the iron mallet. She had a job to do. That was all she was. A job to be done. She would endure. It was the only thing she knew how to do. She would chip the ice, fill the bucket, clean the hall, and then she would hide in her tiny, straw-filled cot in the kitchens and pray that no one remembered she existed, especially not a king. Night fell like a black shroud. The pack hall was ablaze with torchlight, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat, spilled ale, and nervous sweat. Alara moved through the shadows of the kitchens, her presence as insignificant as a mouse in the walls. She had scrubbed the floors until her hands bled, polished the ceremonial silver until her arms ached, and now she was meant to be invisible. But Alpha Vorlag had other plans. He found her huddled by the dying embers of the cooking hearth, trying to steal a moment of warmth. Vorlag was a large, brutish man whose power was built on fear, not respect. His eyes, small and cunning, landed on her like a vulture spotting carrion. "You," he grunted. His voice was a low growl that always made the hairs on her arms stand up. "Get up." Alara scrambled to her feet, her head bowed. "Alpha," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He shoved a heavy, ornate silver chalice into her hands. It was filled to the brim with a dark, spiced wine, the scent cloying and sweet. "You will serve the king." Her blood ran cold, colder than the ice in the trough. "Me, Alpha? But Lyra said—" "I do not care what my daughter said," he snarled, his grip tightening on her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh like talons. "You will take this to him. You will smile, and you will make sure he drinks it." Fear, sharp and metallic, flooded her mouth. "I cannot," she pleaded. "He will not want to be served by an Omega. Please, send Lyra." Vorlag's face twisted into a cruel smile. He held up a small, dark vial. It was uncorked. The chalice smelled not just of wine, but of something else. Something bitter and almond-like, hidden beneath the spices. Poison. Her heart stopped. It simply ceased to beat for a long, terrifying second. They were going to murder the Alpha King, and they were going to use her to do it. "No," she breathed, the word a ghost of a sound. She tried to pull away, to drop the chalice, but his grip was iron. "Listen to me, little shadow," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "You will do this. If you refuse, I will drag you out into the snow and show you exactly how long it takes for a worthless cur like you to freeze. If you try to warn him, I will do the same, but only after my warriors have had their fun. Do you understand me?" The threat was absolute. It left no room for air, no room for hope. Her life was forfeit either way. Die now, horribly, or die later when the king's guards discovered what she had done. What was one more stain on a life already ruined? Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. She gave a single, jerky nod. "Good girl." He released her, his smile widening. "Now go, serve your king." Her feet felt like lead as she pushed through the kitchen door and into the raucous noise of the great hall. The heat was a physical blow after the chill of the kitchens. Every warrior of the Blackwood pack was there, their faces flushed with ale and bravado. They parted before her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and contempt. An Omega, serving the high table? And then she saw him. He sat in the Alpha's ceremonial chair at the head of the hall, and he made it look like a throne. Kalen, the Alpha King, was not a man. He was a force of nature. He was larger than any wolf shifter she had ever seen, with shoulders as broad as a mountain pass and a presence that consumed all the air in the room. His hair was the color of midnight, shot through with threads of silver that seemed to catch the torchlight. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were the color of molten gold, ancient and intelligent, and filled with a weariness that spoke of centuries. He was not celebrating with the others. He was watching, observing, his stillness a stark contrast to the chaos around him. Her hands trembled so violently that the wine sloshed over the rim of the chalice, staining her fingers a deep crimson. It looked like blood. She forced one foot in front of the other, her journey across the hall feeling like a walk to the gallows. The noise faded, the faces blurred. There was only him. He watched her approach, his golden eyes tracking her every hesitant step. He saw the fear in her posture, the tremor in her hands, the fresh cut on her forehead. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze. She reached the high table and sank into a clumsy curtsy, holding the chalice out with both hands. She couldn't meet his eyes. She stared at the carved wood of the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "My king," she whispered, her voice cracking. "A gift from our Alpha, to honor you." Silence descended upon the high table. Vorlag was watching her, his eyes promising agony if she failed. Long, powerful fingers enclosed the cup. They were warm, calloused, and they brushed against hers. The world exploded. It was not a spark. It was a bolt of lightning, a supernova of raw power that shot up her arm and straight into her soul. A scream tore from her throat, but it was lost in the blinding white light that erupted in her mind. Heat, searing and absolute, bloomed on the back of her right wrist. It felt as if a blacksmith's brand was being pressed into her skin, burning through flesh and bone. She stumbled back, clutching her wrist, her eyes wide with terror and agony. She finally looked at him, truly looked at him. His eyes were no longer gold. They were blazing pools of liquid silver, glowing with an impossible, terrifying light. He was staring at her wrist, where a new, intricate mark was now etched into her skin. It was a swirling pattern of a crescent moon cradling a blooming winter rose, glowing with the same silver light as his eyes. The chalice was still in his other hand. He looked from the mark back to her face. The raw power radiating from him was suffocating, a pressure that made the very stones of the hall tremble. The weariness in his face was gone, replaced by a look of profound, earth-shattering shock. A single word escaped his lips, a rumbling whisper that was somehow louder than all the noise in the hall. "You." Alara could only stare, trapped in the inferno of his silver gaze. What was happening? What was this mark? The pain was already receding, leaving a strange, humming warmth in its place. A connection. A cord of energy now stretched between them, invisible but as real as the floor beneath her feet. Then he did the unthinkable. His silver eyes held hers, a universe of emotions swirling within them. Disbelief, rage, and something else. Something terrifyingly tender. He raised the silver chalice to his lips. He knew. The certainty of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. He knew the wine was poisoned. Her mind screamed, "No! Stop!" But her voice was gone, stolen by shock. Slowly, deliberately, while staring directly into her soul, he drank. He drained the cup, every last drop of the poisoned wine sliding down his throat. The hall was utterly silent. The only sound was the soft click as he placed the empty chalice back on the table. He did not choke. He did not falter. A faint, dark line of wine stained his lips. He stood, his immense frame unfolding to its full, intimidating height. He looked past her, his gaze landing on Alpha Vorlag with the force of a physical blow. The temperature in the hall plummeted. But his next words were for her. They were quiet, absolute, and they sealed her fate. Mine. The world tilted on its axis. Her mind, already reeling from the brand and the impossible connection, simply broke. Fear, confusion, and a terrifying, unwelcome flicker of belonging warred within her. He had claimed her. The Alpha King, a being of legend, had marked her and claimed her as his, and she had just served him poison. Vorlag's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His plan hadn't just failed, it had backfired in the most catastrophic way imaginable. He had used the king's fated mate, his queen, as an assassin. The silence in the hall was no longer respectful. It was the heavy, pregnant silence before a slaughter. Kaelin took a step toward her. His movements were fluid, graceful, the stride of a predator. Every instinct in Alara's body screamed at her to run, to flee, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But the bond, this new, terrifying cord that linked them, held her fast. It hummed with his possessiveness, his rage, his focus. It was an anchor in the storm of her terror. "What have you done?" Kaelin's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a deep, resonant thunder that shook the rafters. He wasn't speaking to her. His blazing silver eyes were locked on Vorlag. Vorlag scrambled to his feet, his face pale and slick with sweat. "My king, it is a misunderstanding. The girl, she is a treacherous Omega, a nobody. She acted alone." Lyra, standing behind her father, looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Her usual arrogance was gone, replaced by stark terror. She stared at the glowing mark on Alara's wrist, then at Alara's face, as if seeing her for the first time. The worthless rat had a soul mark from the Alpha King. It was impossible. Kaelin ignored Vorlag's pathetic lies. He took another step, closing the distance between himself and Alara. He gently took her hand, his large, warm fingers wrapping around her wrist, his thumb stroking the still glowing mark. The touch sent another jolt through her, but this one was not painful. It was warm, reassuring, a wave of calming energy that momentarily silenced the frantic beating of her heart. "Did he force you?" Kaelin asked, his voice now impossibly soft, meant only for her. His silver eyes searched her face, demanding the truth. She was too terrified to speak. She could only give the slightest, most pathetic nod. A universe of guilt and fear washed over her. She had still done it. She had delivered the cup. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that promised violence and retribution. The air crackled with his power. "I see." Chaos erupted. Vorlag knew he was dead. He bellowed an order, "Seize her!" It was a desperate, foolish gamble. If he couldn't kill the king, he would take the king's one weakness, his mate. Before Kaelin could react, two of Vorlag's most loyal warriors grabbed Alara. Rough hands seized her arms, yanking her away from Kaelin's protective grasp. The sudden separation was a physical wrenching, tearing at the new bond between them. A cry of pain was ripped from her throat, a pain that had nothing to do with the soldier's bruising grip. It felt like a part of her soul was being torn away. "Alara!" Kaelin's roar was the sound of an avalanche. He moved, a blur of shadow and fury. But other warriors, loyal to Vorlag, threw themselves in his path, buying their alpha seconds. She was dragged backward, her feet scrabbling for purchase on the stone floor. She saw Kaelin dispatch two warriors with contemptuous ease, his hands like blurs of motion. But more were coming. The hall devolved into a maelstrom of shouting and clashing steel as the king's small retinue engaged Vorlag's men. She was pulled through a side door, out of the heat and noise of the hall, and into the biting cold of the night. The shock of the temperature change was dizzying. Her captors didn't slow. They dragged her across the snow-covered courtyard toward the dark maw of the dungeons. The bond between them stretched thin, a taut line of energy that hummed with his frantic rage and her terror. With every foot of distance, the warmth in her wrist faded, replaced by an aching, soul-deep cold. It was a hollowness, an emptiness that was worse than any physical pain she had ever known. They threw her into a cell. The stone floor was slick with damp and grime. The heavy iron door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the small space. A moment later, a small slot in the door opened, and Vorlag's face appeared, his features contorted with a mixture of fear and triumph. "You may be his mate, you little witch," he spat, "but you are still my prisoner. You are the key. The Shadow King will be most pleased." The Shadow King, a name spoken only in fearful whispers, a rival power rising in the dark lands to the east. Malachor. Vorlag wasn't just a traitor to his king. He was a servant to another. The slot slammed shut. Alara was left in absolute darkness. She scrambled to her feet and threw herself against the door, her fists beating against the cold iron. "No! Let me out!" Her only answer was the sound of a heavy bar sliding into place, sealing her in her tomb. She slid down the door, her body racked with sobs. She was alone. Truly alone, in a way she had never been before. The connection to Kaelin was a faint, desperate thread in the vast, crushing darkness. The mark on her wrist was no longer glowing. It was cold stone beneath her skin. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. She had found him. In the most impossible, terrifying way, she had found the other half of her soul. A person who looked at her and saw someone of value. And in the same breath, she had lost him. Worse, she had poisoned him. She had been the instrument of his potential death. Even if he survived Vorlag's treachery, how could he ever forgive her? How could he ever look at her and not see the girl who tried to kill him? The self-loathing was a familiar poison, one she had been drinking her whole life. Lyra was right. Vorlag was right. She was worthless, a tool to be used and discarded. Her one chance at something more, at being seen, was now just another tragedy in a life full of them. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had no meaning in the suffocating dark. The cold from the stone floor seeped into her bones, a deep, unrelenting chill that her thin tunic could not ward off. But it was the cold inside her that was truly killing her. The bond was frayed, weakened by the distance and the sheer despair that clouded her mind. Suddenly, the cell door creaked open. 2 guards entered, their faces grim in the flickering torchlight. They didn't speak. They grabbed her, their hands rough. She was too weak, too lost in her misery to fight back. They dragged her from the cell, up winding stone stairs and into a chamber deep within the fortress. This was not a part of the pack hall she had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of strange incense and something metallic like old blood. Dark tapestries depicting monstrous, shadowy figures covered the walls. In the center of the room was a stone altar, etched with jagged, unfamiliar runes. Vorlag was there, along with a handful of his most trusted inner circle. But they all stood with their heads bowed. There was a new presence in the room. He stood near the altar, cloaked in shadow, though the chamber was well lit with torches. The darkness seemed to cling to him, to emanate from him. He was tall and unnaturally thin, with skin the color of old parchment and eyes that held no light at all, just two pits of absolute blackness. This had to be Malachor, the Shadow King. "So this is her," Malachor said, his voice a dry, sibilant whisper, like snakes slithering over dead leaves. "The lost queen. How utterly disappointing." His void-like eyes fell upon Alara, and she felt a profound, soul-deep revulsion. It was the antithesis of what she felt from Kaelin. If Kaelin was a roaring fire of life and power, this man was the suffocating vacuum of death. The guards forced her to her knees before the altar. One of them shackled her wrists. The cuffs were not iron. They were made of polished, gleaming silver. The moment the silver touched her skin, agony, white-hot and absolute, exploded through her. It was 1,000 times worse than the branding of the soul mark. The silver burned, not just her flesh, but the bond itself. The faint connection to Kaelin was being systematically destroyed, burned away by the profane metal. She screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure agony. Through the haze of pain, she felt a distant, echoing roar of rage. Kaelin. He felt it too. Her pain was his pain. "Excellent," Malachor whispered, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. "The bond is strong. This will make the ritual all the more potent. Kaelin's power is tied to this bond, to her. When we sever it, when we corrupt it and take her power for our own, he will be crippled. The throne will be mine." Vorlag looked on, his face a mixture of fear and greedy anticipation. "The Ember Covenant will be grateful, my lord Malachor." "The Covenant takes what it is owed," Malachor hissed. He raised a hand and shadows coalesced around it, forming a jagged obsidian dagger. "Her power is that of life, of light, a disgusting anomaly. We will snuff it out and remake it into something far more useful." He approached her, the dagger held aloft. The pain from the silver was so intense she could barely breathe. The world was narrowing to a tunnel of agony. The faint thread to Kaelin was flickering, dying. He was so far away. He was fighting, but would he be in time? Despair was a black ocean, and she was drowning in it. She was going to die here, in this dark, unholy place. Her one flicker of hope, the impossible connection to a golden-eyed king, was being extinguished. She was worthless. A vessel of power to be broken and used, nothing more. Her head slumped forward. Tears of pain and hopelessness tracked paths through the grime on her cheeks. It was over. And then she heard it. It was not a sound in the room. It was a voice inside her head, cutting through the pain and the despair like a thunderclap. It was deep, resonant, and filled with a fury that could shatter mountains. Hold on. It was Kaelin. The bond, though damaged, was not yet broken. He was pouring his will, his strength, his very essence down that fragile line, trying to reach her. "They will not have you. You are mine. Hold on, Alara. I am coming." The voice was an anchor. It was a flicker of flame in the crushing dark. He was fighting for her. He had not abandoned her. He called her by her name, a name that had only ever been used with scorn. From his mind it sounded like a prayer. A surge of something new, something she had never felt before, pushed back against the despair. It wasn't hope. It was defiance. A stubborn, gritty refusal to break. She had survived the cold, the hunger, Lyra's cruelty, Vorlog's threats. She would not let this shadow, this creature of nothingness, be the end of her. She lifted her head. Her eyes, filled with tears, met Malicor's empty gaze. The obsidian dagger was descending toward her chest. Through the pain, she focused on that voice, on that thread of connection. She clung to it with everything she had left. Kaelin. The fortress shook. A deep, resonant boom echoed from far above, the sound of a great wall being shattered. Shouts of alarm and the clash of steel began to filter down into the ritual chamber. Malicor paused, his head tilting. It seems the wolf is at the door. He smiled his thin, lipless smile. No matter. He is too late. He raised the dagger again, preparing for the final blow. But the voice in her head gave her one last, desperate command. Not a plea to hold on, but a roar of pure, untamed power. Fight! And something inside Alara finally broke free. The sound was not a boom, but a deafening crack, as if the world itself was splitting apart. A tremendous, howling roar echoed from the direction of the main keep, a sound of pure, primal fury that was more beast than man. It was Kaelin's war cry, and it resonated not in her ears, but in her very soul. The stone floor of the ritual chamber trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Vorlag and his men looked up, their faces paling. Malicor's empty eyes narrowed. He is more desperate than I anticipated. The sounds of battle grew louder, closer, the disciplined, brutal efficiency of trained warriors clashing with desperate pack members. Alara could hear the distinctive ring of high-quality steel, the war shouts of Kaelin's elite guard, the Silver Legion. He hadn't come alone. He had brought his army. Malicor turned his attention back to Alara, his patience wearing thin. Let him come. He will only arrive in time to watch you die. He lunged, the obsidian dagger aimed at her heart. At that same moment, the doors to the chamber were blasted inward, ripped from their hinges by a wave of raw, kinetic force. Kaelin stood there, framed in the ruined doorway. He was a vision of righteous fury. His silver eyes were burning with a light so intense it was painful to look at. Blood, not his own, dripped from his hands. He was no longer a king. He was a storm. He was vengeance. His gaze found Alara, chained and kneeling, the dagger inches from her chest. He saw the silver shackles, felt the agonizing burn through their bond. A guttural roar of pure, undiluted rage was torn from his throat. He moved. He was not just fast, he was instantaneous. A blur of darkness and silver light that crossed the room in a single heartbeat. But Malicor was ancient and powerful in his own right. He shifted his aim, turning the dagger from Alara and sweeping it in a shadowy arc toward the charging king. Kaelin couldn't stop his momentum in time. The obsidian blade, humming with dark magic, sliced across his side. Kaelin grunted in pain, stumbling for a half-step, but his focus never wavered. He slammed into Malicor, his fist connecting with the Shadow King's jaw with a sickening crack. The shadowy being was thrown backward, crashing into the stone altar. But the damage was done. A deep, black wound marred Kaelin's side, and it was not bleeding red. It bled a sluggish, dark smoke, a poison of shadow magic that was already spreading, sapping his strength. Malachor shrieked as the light touched him, a high, unearthly sound of agony. The light was his antithesis, a holy fire that burned away his shadows, searing his very essence. He scrambled backward, his form flickering and dissolving, and vanished into a rift of pure darkness, escaping just before the light could annihilate him. But the light did not harm Kaelin. It washed over him, gentle and warm. Where it touched the smoking, poisoned wound on his side, the dark magic sizzled and evaporated. New flesh knitted itself together, the skin sealing without a scar. The light poured into him, replenishing his strength, reigniting the silver fire in his eyes. Alara stood, no longer hunched or afraid. Power, raw and immense, coursed through her veins. She was wreathed in a soft, pulsating golden light, her hair floating around her as if she were underwater. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating. It felt right. It felt like coming home to a part of herself she never knew existed. She looked down at her hands, at the light that emanated from her skin. What was happening to me? The question was no longer one of fear, but of awe. Vorlag, groaning, began to stir. He pushed himself up, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror. What are you? Alara turned her head, and her eyes, now glowing with that same inner light, met his. The timid, broken Omega was gone. In her place stood something else entirely. I am not a tool, she said, and her voice was no longer a whisper. It was calm, clear, and resonated with an authority that dwarfed his own. It was the voice of a queen. I am not a shadow, and you will never touch what is mine again. She raised a hand, and a beam of pure light shot forth, striking him in the chest. It did not kill him. It did not burn him. It simply unmade his power. He screamed as he felt his connection to his wolf, his alpha strength, drain away, leaving him a weak, powerless man. He collapsed, sobbing, a broken shell. The battle was over. The room was silent, save for Vorlag's pathetic weeping. The golden light around Alara slowly subsided, though it did not vanish completely. It retreated into her, leaving a faint, ethereal glow on her skin and a warmth in her chest that chased away the last of the cold. She turned. Kaelin was standing just a few feet away, his wound completely healed. He was staring at her, his silver eyes wide with an emotion she couldn't name. It was more than awe, more than relief. It was reverence. He took a slow step forward, then another. He stopped before her, his massive frame seeming to shield her from the rest of the world. The carnage, the broken bodies, the lingering scent of dark magic, it all faded away. There was only him. The bond between them was no longer a fragile thread. It was a vibrant, thrumming river of energy, a conduit of shared emotion and strength. She could feel his awe, his fierce pride, his overwhelming, soul-shaking love. It was a tidal wave, and she didn't drown in it. She floated. He slowly raised a hand, as if afraid she might vanish. His fingers, calloused and warm, gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The simple touch was an earthquake. I knew, he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. The moment I saw you, I felt it. A light hidden in the deepest shadow. Tears, not of pain or fear, but of overwhelming release, streamed down her face. She had spent her entire life believing she was nothing, a creature of ash and darkness. But he had seen the light in her all along. I tried to kill you, she whispered, the guilt a final stubborn ghost. "You were a weapon pointed at my chest," he corrected her, his voice firm but gentle. "But you were never the one pulling the trigger. I saw the truth in your eyes, Alara. That is why I drank. To show them. To show you. Your soul is not capable of that kind of darkness." He paused, his thumb stroking her cheek, wiping away a tear. "And I would have drunk 1,000 poisoned cups to find you." His words washed away the last vestiges of her self-doubt. He didn't just accept her, he cherished her, even the parts of her story that brought her the most shame. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender, not to his power, but to the safety and belonging he offered. It was a feeling she had never known. It was home. "Mine," he murmured again, but this time it was not a claim of possession. It was a vow, a promise. She found her voice, shaky but clear. "Yours," she answered, accepting the truth of it, the rightness of it. As she spoke the word, the mark on her wrist flared with brilliant golden light. It was no longer just his silver mark on her skin. Her own golden light infused it, twisting with the silver in a beautiful, harmonious dance. At the same instant, a soft glow appeared on Kaelin's chest, directly over his heart. Through the fabric of his tunic, an ethereal mark bloomed into existence, a mirror of hers, a golden winter rose cradled by a silver moon. She had claimed him in return. The bond was complete, a two-way current of absolute trust and devotion. He looked down at the mark on his chest, then back at her, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across his harsh, beautiful features. It was like watching the sunrise after a long, dark night. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not rough or demanding. It was a seal, a sacrament. It was gentle and deep, and spoke of centuries of loneliness finally ended. It was the taste of homecoming. When they finally broke apart, the world slowly filtered back in. The sounds of his silver legion securing the fortress, the groans of the defeated, the cold air drifting in through the shattered doorway. Reality returned, but it was a new reality. Her reality. Kaelin kept one arm wrapped securely around her waist, holding her to his side as if he would never let her go. With his other hand, he gestured to his second-in-command, a grim-faced warrior with a scar down his cheek who had appeared in the doorway. "Gideon," Kaelin said, his voice once again that of a king, filled with command. "Take the traitor. He will answer for his crimes." He looked down at the whimpering form of Vorlag. "The man is no longer an alpha. He is nothing." Gideon's eyes flickered to Alara, to the faint light that still clung to her, and to the new mark glowing over his king's heart. Understanding and awe dawned on his face. He bowed deeply, not just to Kaelin, but to her as well. "At once, my king, my queen." Queen. The word hung in the air, foreign and impossible. Yet as she stood there, held securely in Kaelin's arms, feeling his strength and her own new power humming in her blood, it didn't feel wrong. Kaelin led her from the dark, blood-stained chamber, up the stairs, and back into the main hall. His warriors, the fearsome Silver Legion, had subdued all of Vorlag's loyalists. They lined the hall, their armor battered, their faces grim. But as Kaelin entered with Alara at his side, a silence fell. Every warrior, to a man, dropped to one knee. They bowed their heads in deference. They were not just bowing to their king, they were bowing to the woman who shone with a faint, holy light, the mate he had finally found, the queen who had saved his life. Lyra was huddled in a corner, held by 2 guards. Her face was a mess of tear tracks and disbelief. Her world, built on her own perceived importance and Alara's worthlessness, had been utterly demolished. As Alara passed, their eyes met. There was no triumph in Alara's gaze, only a quiet finality. She was done with that life. Kaelin led her to the great doors of the hall and pushed them open. The sun was just beginning to rise over the frost-fanged peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold. The air was clean, cold, and new. It was the dawn of a new day. She breathed it in, a deep, cleansing breath. The cold no longer had teeth. It was just air, fresh and full of promise. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. His silver eyes were soft, filled with a love so profound it made her ache. "Malachor will return," he said, his voice serious. "He will hunt you for the power you hold." "Let him," she said, and the words held no fear. "He will find I am not so easily broken." Kaelin's smile returned, fierce and proud. "No, you are not." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You are my queen, my mate, my light. And I will spend the rest of my very long life showing you what that means." She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart through their bond, the solid reality of his presence. She was no longer Alara the Ash-Stained, the Shadow, the Omega. She was Alara, Queen of the Silver Throne, mate to the Alpha King. She was a light in the darkness. She had a home. She had a family. She was loved. After a lifetime of being invisible, she was finally truly seen. And her new life was just beginning.